So welcome, Secretary Garvin, and take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Jill. Really is a pleasure to be here. I thank Dee for reaching out. I think the timing is great, being that this is Earth Week, with Earth Day being Friday, and we have kind of Earth Month. And as I say at DNREC, every day is Earth Day. So, but it's funny because I always talk to our team, our family at DNREC. This is the 1 week all year that people are really paying attention, and so we try to get as much information out. And each, I actually was watching 3, 6, and 10 Philly media today, because we had an event this morning to see what kind of coverage we may have gotten, and all of them are running stories on EVs and stories on, got a little bit of coverage of our tree planting ceremony this morning. So it's really kind of an exciting time to be in this business. I also, Jill, you mentioned the YES conference, and for all of you who are involved in that, it's an amazing conference. And you mentioned my remarks being inspirational. I try not to judge my own remarks, but what I can tell you that is inspirational is all of those 300 and some odd students that were participating in the conference. Got a chance to spend some quality time with a couple of them and meet a few others throughout the time that I was there. And as I said at the conference, and I will say it to all of you, often I'll speak at events and they'll refer to our youth and our students as the environmental stewards of tomorrow. They really are the environmental stewards of today. Our job is to make sure that we are not messing up their planet until the point that they can have the keys to the car and they can be looking out for the younger generation to follow them. So, and there's nothing bigger than climate change and the impacts that we're seeing here in Delaware. And so I'm just going to go through a brief presentation, but I like to kind of get to the Q&A parts, because I've generally recognize about halfway through whatever thing I'm speaking or presenting, everyone's already starting to form the questions that they have for me. And so I'd like to try to get to that point. But Leslie, if you can go to the first slide. So in November 4th of last year, Governor Carney unveiled the state's climate action plan. And the plan really is building on, and I'll touch on this in a few minutes, building on all the other great work that has preceded. Wanted to make sure that everybody understood. We were very clear that, this wasn't, hey, we're now going to focus on climate. It is, hey, we're now going to put the kind of the next phases of what we're going to do. And when we first started this, and I think we've got a number of our folks may be participating in this tonight. Our conversation was really based on two fronts. One is climate action plan can't just be looking at the mitigation side of it, because we are already seeing the impacts. We also wanted to make sure that it was addressing the resiliency side of it, so that we're kind of all in. And so I'm going to touch on kind of each of those, and then I'll get to questions. Leslie, can you go to the next? So I like to try to talk about what the climate action plan is not before I talk about what it is. It's not changing any existing law. It's not creating any new policies. It's not establishing new regulations or alter the current funding levels. It basically is a GPS for options that we have out there. All of the things I mentioned are part of the options that the climate action plan lays out. But really, it is the ability to kind of show us the way where we need to go, and the options that we have on both resiliency and mitigation. Next slide. So what the climate plan does is, as I said, it does create these identification of opportunities where we can minimize emissions here in the state of Delaware, where we can maximize our resiliency, which a lot is in partnering with a lot of different groups and governments, and really looking at the best available science to figure out what that path is. And so I kind of liken it more to a GPS, because there's a lot of different ways that we can get there, and we need to keep looking at what are the best options and best opportunities at any given time. For example, bipartisan infrastructure law, something that just came about and really bringing a lot of resources, particularly as we look to electrify our transportation grid. So this is going to be a living document, that will be constantly updated and revised over time. I didn't want to have some doorstop that nobody used or nobody looked at, and I think the folks who worked on this, both in our climate, coastal, and energy division, as well as in our air quality division, did it, and all the partners and everybody who participated in the outreach groups and provided feedback. I think we put together that GPS that will be very helpful for us moving forward. Next slide. As I said, living document. We're going to continue to build on strategies that exist, and as we get additional science and additional data and additional information, we'll continue to update both our knowledge base as well as what some of the solutions to those challenges are. Next slide. So we really put together some guiding principles on how we wanted to focus on this and how we really want to implement it. So we wanted to ensure that the climate action was ambitious and adaptable. Ensuring climate action accounts for all the costs and all the benefits, and ensuring climate action is engaged, empowering, and especially equitable. Next slide. So the plan overview, we're looking at both guiding our efforts on greenhouse gas emissions, as well as looking at how we maximize resiliency to the impacts we're already seeing and the impacts we're going to see in the future. And it's helped to kind of create our emissions reduction goals, which is at least 26% of the 2005 levels by 2025, and that will continue to be updated as we make progress. Integrate emission reduction and climate change adaptation actions, and set a course for our state climate action in the decades ahead. Next slide. So the first part is I'm going to touch on maximizing our resiliency. Next slide. So, we're the impacts and what those challenges are really kind of depend on where you are in the world, and even in Delaware, where you might be located. And they primarily take the form of sea level rise, increased temperatures, and more frequent intense storms, including heavier precipitation and flooding. Next slide. What we're working on, what we've learned. So we had staff from 10 Delaware state agencies identify climate action adaptation actions that they'd like to take in the next 5 years. All agencies are already involved in resiliency actions. This is just really looking at how we expand that. And then working with the attendees at the various workshops, really identified regulatory actions and community stakeholder support were the most important to be implemented. Next slide. Strategies to maximize resiliency. So we're looking at where we might want to update or create new state regulations, putting together management plans, looking at facility and infrastructure design and management, continued having across the board agency support for the climate action plan, as well as looking at really expanding it to all levels of government, continuing to research and build the science and monitor so that we can gauge where we are and what the impacts are we're seeing over the course of time. And then we want to continue to support communities and stakeholders like yourself and continue with outreach and education. Next slide. So the strategies that we're building off of is the sea level rise committee work and reports that have been previously done, the 2014 climate framework for Delaware, the climate resiliency action summary, the natural and working lands report, and many other initiatives that have been going on in our state for years. This action plan kind of builds off of that. Some of the priorities, so Tree for Every Delawarean initiative, Teddy. So I did another tree planting and volunteer recognition ceremony this morning in Brandywine Park. We had students that came out and helped us plant some trees last week. The governor and I and Secretary Skuse were joined by students from Dover High School's Strive program for special needs students, as well as volunteers from Bank of America to plant 110 or so trees at Killen's Pond. Right now we're up over 75,000 trees that have been planted under this initiative. But we also continue to focus on, we can't be removing trees while we're planting all these new trees. So trying to figure out how we can educate and we can work with developers and governments that have planning responsibilities to see how we can continue to minimize tree loss. We're continuing our work with our Resilient Communities Partnership Program and Coastal Training Program, so we can work with local governments so that they can plan and identify what the impacts they're seeing and what steps they can take to better position themselves to be adaptable and resilient to climate change. And DelDOT recently created a new division of resiliency and sustainability, which focuses on innovative solutions to climate challenges. And one example of that was Ida. And Secretary Majeski and I had a conversation shortly after that about there being places in the city of Wilmington that saw flooding that never seen it before, and roads that were inundated that DelDOT from experience did not have flooding issues, and the fact that this is continually changing and we need to make sure that we're making that adaptation and identifying where those problems exist. And as I think many of you know, that the impact from Ida was not necessarily the rainfall or solely the rainfall that we got here. It was the rainfall that our neighbors in Pennsylvania received that made its way down into Delaware that really had a major impact on us. Next slide. So the other piece, which is where a lot of the attention has gone on historically, is how do we minimize emissions? Next slide. So, we know human activities have increased the amount of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, and our Division of Air Quality conducts our annual greenhouse gas inventory of state greenhouse gas emissions. And the top three sectors that are leading sources are transportation, industrial impacts, and electrical power. And we recognize that these are all very much linked to each other, particularly as we look at changing the transportation structure in the state. If we are having it being done by electric sources, if those electric sources are all coming from coal-fired power plants or fossil fuels, that's not necessarily getting us there. So these really are all connected with each other. Next slide. So with no new actions, we'll just miss the 2025 goal of at least 26% reduction from 2005 levels. And we're kind of really close right now. But we also recognize that there will be development and things that will continue to challenge our ability. And so we can't just rest on our laurels that it is important to continue moving forward. With the various model actions, if we put those in place, we can exceed the 2025 target and hit a little over 31%. Next slide. All right, strategies to minimize emissions. Next slide. So we're looking at clean and renewable energy. We're looking at energy efficiency. We're looking at the transportation systems. We're looking at high global warming potential greenhouse gases like methane and others. And then we're looking how we continue to offset carbon emissions. Next slide. We're building off of the renewable energy portfolio standards. We are working on, we've worked on hydrofluorocarbons regulations. We also introduced a program called Cool Switch, which provides funding to help folks change out their machinery that uses HFCs earlier. So a little bit of a carrot, a little bit of a stick. The community solar law to try to help open up more solar opportunities. Clean fuel and transportation incentive program, our energy efficiency investment fund, our green energy initiative incentive programs, and many other programs as well. Next slide. So a couple of things that we've been implementing. We've got a $1.4 million grant funding to expand our electric vehicle charging network. As I mentioned earlier, there's also going to be money coming in from the BIL to DelDOT to help support both changing the electric infrastructure and also investments in electric buses. We also started a pilot program in which low and moderate income residents can look to invest in solar. We're kind of modeling it off of our weatherization program as well, and kind of a pilot to blend those two together and see what opportunities, and hopefully we'll be able to make the pilot more permanent. We're in the process of updating the energy plan, and so forth and so on. We will continue to look at what are the next steps, what are the next investments we can make. Next slide. So the key takeaways are climate action plan is our GPS for both resiliency and mitigation. Strategies can be implemented over time, looking at resources, data, development of partnerships. Actions can evolve and change. This is going to be, as I said, a living document. As we learn more, we will see what we can do and what we can do faster. And the plan is there to help minimize our reduction goals, not only for what we're trying to get to at 2025, but for decades ahead. I think the last is the final slide, which is thank you very much for your time, and I will be take questions. I think Jill, you were going to kind of moderate that. The promise that I make all the time is I will not make up answers. If I don't know, I will find out and get back to you.
Well, as you know, this is going to be a feisty group. So I'm going to read these, but I think that it's better if the person who asks them, I think the first one up is Charlie Garlow. Charlie, you want to just go ahead and ask your question directly?
And Charlie, before you go, I just want to put a disclaimer in. For some reason, when there's stormy weather, my connection isn't as great. We've been good so far, but if I lose you, it's not because I didn't like the question or I didn't have the answer, but I will come back in as quickly as possible. So go ahead, Charlie.
Swell. That's a great question, Charlie. I can't hear you. Breaking up here.
That's why I wanted to warn you before anybody asked the question, so that I was being completely transparent.
Great. Well, I was starting off by saying not only thank you for your op-ed that you and the governor wrote together, I guess, but to say thank you for the electric vehicle efforts you've made by adopting the California ZEV, zero emission vehicle mandate. That's something can be done by executive order, and you've done that. And my question is, what's next for electric vehicles? I'm president of the Delaware Electric Vehicle Association. We'd like to see the MOU for medium and heavy duty vehicles be signed. Is that something that's on your desk or getting close to it, or is that on your list of things to do?
It is a list. It is on my list of things I have my eyes on. One of the things we want to do is get light duty vehicles kind of moving forward. Many of you know that California is currently going back and revising that program. So we're kind of trying to work our timing with them so that we don't have to change things as soon as we implement it. So we're going to go through a fairly robust stakeholder process. But obviously that is definitely something that is on our radar screen.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. I'm just going to go ahead and read this one, if that's okay with you, Jack. Garvin. My research, this is Jack Garvin, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. My research indicates that you've never supported the sale of the 133-acre Grassdale parcel of Fort DuPont State Park for private development as an RV campground. Can the Grassdale sale be reversed? Is Grassdale still protected open space land?
So, Jack, I think I've answered you this question several times in several different fashions. The bill that enabled the Fort DuPont project to move forward provided that all lands would be turned over for that project. The issue has been settled years ago. I know that at our next Fort DuPont regular meeting, we're going to, again, hopefully once and for all, share with everyone the determination, but Grassdale is part of the Fort DuPont Corporation, and the plan moving forward for that parcel is for an RV park.
Shawn, can I follow up with that? Because I am really curious about that and that situation, which I don't really know. I wasn't paying attention at the time, but I am curious because my understanding is that for all, I guess, state park land, but even just state lands in general, there is a surplus property law that dictates how surplus, I mean, if that's what it's considered surplus, you know, it dictates how surplus land is supposed to be disposed of, but also, you know, kind of combined with that is, my understanding is the fact that it went through the Open Space Council. So it sort of, in my mind, I would imagine it sort of had a double layer of protection, but I don't know, I guess the legislature can just do what it wants by decree. Is that the only reason why it happened?
Yep, it was a change in state law that provided all of that land to be part of Fort DuPont Corporation. Predates me as secretary. The vote on what was going to happen at that area was a very public vote. I can tell you I did not vote in favor of it, but once it passed, we're all responsible for following the decision of the majority of the board, and so that's kind of where we are. Next question.
Okay, yeah, that's another question from Darcy Fisk. Mark and Nancy Weiss are wanting to know, will Delaware finally phase out coal-fueled, I can't say that, electric power generation in the state?
Well, I mean, we've made a significant progress. Indian River, which is really now just operating as a reliability facility, I think 7% of the time it operates. They at one point were looking to have it stop operating after June of this year, but after PJM and some studies were done, they felt the need to have it still be online was necessary. But the ultimate goal is that we will be phasing out fossil fuel as a source of electric generation moving into the future. But right now, Indian River is still online.
That answer that. Amy Rowe would like to know, is there any plan to remove the industrial exemption from the renewable portfolio standard, especially for non-industrial energy users, such as the University of Delaware, which is currently exempt from the RPS?
I have not had any discussions on that recently, so the answer for now is no, but it doesn't mean it's not something that we'll still engage in conversations.
Shweta, are you back from Florida? You want to unmute and ask your question about Maryland, please? Unmute.
Good evening, Secretary Garvin. My question is, Maryland just passed a landmark legislation with targets of reducing 60% emissions by 2031. And we have a sitting president. President Biden's goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030. Is DNREC considering more ambitious climate goals?
We always are. We are having conversations. As I said, we're working on the energy plan, as well as looking at potential some additional legislative action. So yes, that is a very robust topic of conversation in the department.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are
Jill,
you
you
waiting
wanna
to
work-
buy, John?
Sorry.
Jill, are you?
Jill, do you want to, should we try to get through the written comments, and then if we do catch up, then we could have people on mic, or what? Are you trying to work through them? Jill, you frozen? Okay, sorry, Shawn, I'll try to pick up. Shawn's still here, right?
I'm still here.
Okay, we lost Jill, I think. So Mark Weiss asks, will Delaware support offshore wind energy generation now that DNREC has published the excellent SIOW report from UDEL?
So currently we are as many of you know, and I'll try to not do too much of a history update. The governor convened the offshore wind working group back in 2018. One of the issues was, at the time, there was a big push to say, Delaware, you need to join now, you need to go big, and you need to do it now. And the working group agreed that we anticipated that the price point would continue to decline. And so we reached out to the Special Initiative on Offshore Wind, University of Delaware, to do an analysis on where we are with the price point and look at options. I think they did a really good job. I think there's a couple of options that weren't necessarily considered that we are looking at. We're in the process of figuring out what makes the most sense for Delaware's engagement in offshore wind. So it is very much highlighted in the climate action plan, and something that we are having a lot of conversations on.
Can I follow up a little bit with that?
Sure.
My understanding is that DNREC is doing more, having more consultants look at that SIOW plan. So what kind of a time frame is being considered for that?
No, we're not having, I think there was a little bit confusion. I think Willett was on kind of speaking tour about the report before it was done. We were still looking at it and asking some questions and making sure that we understood it. So we're not having additional consultants looking at what SIOW put together, but there did seem to be some confusion and on what the timing was on all of that. So once we release the report, that's the final report.
Okay, so there's no more consultation with anybody that's being looked at that. So I mean, that can be done by.
Not as it relates to the report. We obviously are looking at, what are the options for Delaware? How do we participate? And what would make the most sense for us and engaging in offshore wind. So
there's no time frame for that?
No, and I hate to throw anything out, which we are looking at all the various pieces of information and having conversations with other colleagues throughout the state to figure out what might make the most sense. But I don't have a timetable for you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Shawn, the next question. Jill, I jumped in because we lost you for a second.
I got lost. Yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
Natalie asked if DNREC has any plans to revisit community composting projects to help divert food waste away from landfills producing harmful methane gas. And so I'll let you go first, and then I might fill in after you.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, we're looking at through our recycling program in our waste division. We're looking at what opportunities are out there and how it ties back to both the climate action plan and our work generally in air outside of climate, recognizing that food waste does help create methane, and if we can reduce the amount of food that people use so that they do not have a lot of excessive food waste, and then look to handle it in an appropriate manner. When I was at my previous job, I toured operation in Penn State, the city of Penn State, not the college, though it's adjacent, where they were working on a community food waste program. We don't have any plans right now, but we clearly recognize that's another area, an option that deserves some consideration.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I'll just add that we've actually, for those of you who don't know, the statistic is that 37% of our landfill matter is food waste, which is huge, right? 37%, that seems crazy. And actually, we work really closely with Adam Schlachter, who's with Shawn in the DNREC division of waste management. So we work with him, as you might imagine, quite a bit on plastic pollution issues and zero waste issues. And Adam encouraged us to get involved in composting in some way. So we are launching this spring, actually, a community composting project where we're going to partner with community organizations that, in particular might have a community garden and they aren't yet composting, taking food waste from the community to try to help kind of take that step. I think a lot of people know about backyard composting, but a lot of people can't or don't want to have their own backyard composter. So community composting is sort of the next step up from that, where, if you live within walking distance, say, to wherever, a spot where a community composting site can be set up, it makes a lot of sense. So we're launching a project to help communities do that, and hope to do it in partnership with DNREC and Adam's encouragement. And I know that he's been looking at not a regulation change, but just a way of sort of tweaking the way, I guess, they handle the internal permitting, because right now if you wanted to have a community composting operation, you'd actually have to pay a $700 annual permitting fee, which is a pretty hefty, bar to jump over for a community group. So anyway, we are working with DNREC to try to remove barriers like that, and also just spread the word and offer technical support to anyone that's interested in starting a community composting program. So sorry, Shawn, I had to get that plugged in.
That's great. And I think you raised a very important point, and not just as it relates to composting, but just in general. And you and I are both government officials, so I say this, kind of recognizing that as well. But not everything needs to be done by government. Not everything should be done by government. And you look at community gardens, and you look at things like that where the community is really invested in it. A lot of times it's more successful than if folks feel like government's hoisting something upon them. So all these different partnerships, and clearly, we want to do our part, removing barriers, but I think there's a lot of things that and again, going back to the Youth Environmental Summit, there are a lot of kids who are already doing things, and a lot of leadership that isn't government related. We do the really big things well, but I think government can support, but I think community leadership is really important as well.
Yeah, but just to chime in, I talked to Adam about this a while ago, and I agree with you. Lots of times people can find solutions without government interference, but this was a case where government actually was preventing communities for working on this because of the regulations, the permitting. So it seemed like the government was kind of like getting in the way. It sounds like, Dee, you have worked out something with DNREC.
But it's in progress. So I think
that's great.
I'm sure Shawn has heard about it, or will hear about it soon, and have that discussion with Adam about what he's thinking. So yeah, Natalie, we'll have to get you more involved.
Great, thank you.
I think that's a great point, and we like to know and have identified areas in which we can help support, and we can create solutions. And it sounds like this may be an area that we need to chime in on.
Yep, we look forward to working with you on it. That's the one of the barriers that we know about. So, and we've been working with Adam on the other thing is that each community garden will have to have a designated trained person. So, we've been working with him on kind of what that would look like, and what DNREC would be looking for to satisfy that requirement. And then our program will help people meet those requirements. So I just put the link in the chat for that program. If anyone's interested, certainly reach out and we can tell you more.
Shweta are we done with this? I'm sorry.
Yep.
Is asking, we need more electric buses for Delaware, ! Are we moving any fundings to support school buses?
Yes, I was specifically talking about electric school buses. Maybe mention that. I forgot to mention.
So very good question. Yes, I don't think I'm allowed to stop it at just yes. I have been having conversations with both my counterpart in the Department of Education, Dr. Holodek, Secretary Holodek, as well as working with our counterpart, Secretary Majeski, on how and where and how we might make that happen. It is a little bit more complicated because of the uses of school buses and reliability issues and other things that we're trying to figure out our way through. But yes, for many reasons, having school buses, if we can change the fleet out or more electric school buses, just the public health benefits to our students, not to mention climate impacts. But it is a conversation that we're having. But I don't anticipate starting tomorrow. We're going to start introducing a bunch of electric school buses, but it's definitely on the radar, and we're having those conversations.
Fabulous. Leslie Richardson, you want to ask your question? Unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sure, just a minute. There's a political science concept about free riders, and that means not everybody pays for their services. Now, EV autos pay no taxes for the use of Delaware roads, and there's a serious equity issue that's becoming more relevant. What's the state going to do to support, collection of a tax so that everybody pays for their fair share of the roads and the upkeep?
Yeah, so I don't have an answer, but it is the question that we're asking. As there's a migration to a more electric transportation system, you're exactly right. The Transportation Trust Fund is partly part of a fuel tax, and so if you're not having that funding coming in because everybody has an electric vehicle, then you're going to have to consider and look at other ways, a mileage tax or something along those lines, so that we can continue to make sure that our roads can be safe and passable into the future.
Can you tell me what are other states doing about this?
I don't know. I know that there's been a lot of the same conversations in other states. I'm not sure. I haven't looked. I've kind of this is more in the wheelhouse of DelDOT looking at this and what the impacts would be. So I don't know offhand if any other states have already done, but I know that the conversation is going on nationally.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Peggy, you want to ask your question? Peggy Schultz, unmute.
Well, Secretary Garvin, you mentioned a couple things that the SIOW report had omitted, and I wondered what those things were that they had omitted. So you said they had omitted options in an earlier response. Yeah.
So one of the big things that we'll need to consider is there an opportunity for us to join in existing projects that are out there, as opposed to Delaware starting from scratch and putting together our quote own offshore wind investments. And so I think based on our conversations, I put a little placeholder in there, but that's one of the things that we need to explore further, if that's a viable option.
Anything else?
That's the big one.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Amy, Amy Rowe, you have something about that? I'm not sure I'm following this. You just had an RFP for a consultant?
A couple of questions queued up. One, the DNREC has been invited to participate in activities regarding lead poisoning prevention and has really declined to do that. So will DNREC participate in activities regarding lead poisoning prevention? DNREC has in the past on its lead poisoning prevention activities assigned a convicted pedophile to interact with the public on this. So if DNREC participates in lead poisoning prevention activities, which are children's issues, are you going to prevent pedophiles from being the voice of your agency? And then my other question was regarding this RFP on wind power and where that stands. So those were my questions that I asked.
Okay, so on the RFP, that is for us to get support for looking at the things that I just mentioned on where exactly we go with wind. It is not was not a, as I think Jill, you had, or somebody had said earlier, that somehow that was revisiting the SIOW report. It actually is building off of that, building off of what the task force looked at, and looking at what is an actual viable next steps for us on offshore wind. So this consulting work is to look at kind of across the board and help us make some decisions with regards to the lead group. I'd have to get more information on that. I'm not familiar with that one, so I'll have to look into that. Next question.
Okay, Richard Nichols, you want to ask your question? He says, if 25% reduction is the goal of emissions by 2025, what is the actual percentage reduction to date?
It's actually, the goal is actually at least 26% by 2025. We're in that basic neighborhood right now of 26%. We want to, continue to move forward on that. And again, 2025 is 3 years off. So, the hope is that we'll be able to do much better, but we're in that neighborhood right now.
Okay. There was another question. Somebody else earlier on asked, what the time frame was for the climate action plan to be reviewed and revisited.
It's going to be ongoing. I mean, we're going to be continually looking at it. What have we done? What are we crossing off the list? What new things are out there that we want to add to the list? So, as I said, I really look at it as a living document, not just something that we go back in 5 years and say, hey, let's take a look, see how we did. It really will be our GPS moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Gary Leonarducci has a question about the bridge over the Brandywine. You want to ask that, Gary?
Yeah. Hi, Shawn. I used to live around the corner from your mom and dad, and I do Social Security disability, so I work with your sister as well. So I just wanted to say hello first. But I live on the Brandywine right by the Bancroft Bridge, and it was flooded in September. We've had a couple, we've met with some of your parks people, and they've been very helpful. But we're really concerned because it used to have an awful lot of traffic, and it looks like it's not going to be back up for another 2 years. And I was just wondering if there's any other way that we can get a little, get that, a footbridge across the Brandywine up a little bit earlier than 2 years. There's an awful lot of people that are missing out on a lot of exercise and enjoying the park. And we would really appreciate it if it could be sped up. I know it's, you're doing it as fast as you can, but if there's any way to speed it up, I would certainly appreciate it. The last thing is there's an opportunity to, if we're building one footbridge, right, replacing the old one, there's an opportunity to really expand the Brandywine Trail a little bit, all the way at the end of Alapocas Woods. There's a property that's for sale, and we've introduced it to the state, but there's a property that used to belong to the railroad that's now for sale, and that could link the Brandywine Park to Hagley Museum, and that would really be a nice opportunity for the people in the city of Wilmington. So I'd really like to get some support from your office for that program.
So let me try to answer them in order. With regards to the bridge, we're moving as fast as we can. We want to get something in there as quickly as we can. It's very complicated because of the engineering and because of the damage. Basically, we're going to have to replace the entire structure. So I get it. I hear you. You are not the only one who has raised the desire to get that replaced as quickly as we can, and that's what we're working on doing. So duly noted on that. With regard to the property, I'm trying to vision exactly where you're talking about, but it sounds like it might be an open space kind of deal. And so since but we can, if you can get information on what you're talking about, I can turn it over to our open space folks to
Yeah, we contacted Ray I'm sorry, the director of Parks.
Ray Bivens.
Bivens, yeah. And so we let him know about it. He's turning it over there. This would be a great opportunity. I mean, I think this is a one time in a lifetime in terms of the state having some money to create some new trails, some extra money to do that. It's actually giving money away to all the taxpayers, something very unusual. So I'm hoping that we could take some of that money and improve the trails around the Brandywine. I'm also on the board of Delaware Greenway, so I'm giving a plug in for them as well.
Well, I appreciate that. I'll follow back up with Ray. Obviously, there's a whole process when we evaluate properties, and ultimately, Open Space Council makes a recommendation to me, and so then I have to then approve it. So I'm always a little leery about expressing my support or not support until something is.
I appreciate.
But I will follow up on that. And I just on my mother's side, we have a very strong connection to Hagley. My great grandfather died in a powder explosion at Hagley, obviously many moons ago. So I'm very familiar, and I think our goal is to try to have as much connectivity throughout the state as we can. So
one of the things we're trying to do is recreate the old trail that the workers from 40 Acres used to take behind Rockford Park over to Hagley, where they would work in the work at the factory there. So it's probably something that your family walked on many times. So appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Right. Thanks, Gary.
Okay.
This is Delaware, right? Everybody knows everybody. Larry, live spin, you had a question about your
Can you hear me? Am
Yeah.
I unmuted?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, Secretary Garvin, when you were EPA Regional Administrator, Region 3, you were very instrumental in the Bay TMDL, defending it in federal court. I followed that very closely, so you're a strong advocate for the Chesapeake Bay TMDL cleanup. What steps is Delaware
For the rest
taking?
of us, what's a TMDL?
I'm sorry, total maximum daily load. I'm being too wonkish here as an
What did it say
environmental
again?
lawyer.
Total
maximum daily load.
Got it.
It's
All
a
right.
term for cleanup goals that have to be met through WIPNA implementation plans by the Bay states.
So the best way I can describe it to everyone, and Mike McCabe, my former boss at EPA, used to describe it as looking at an elevator. You have an elevator, you go in. I think the elevator in the building I was in Philadelphia had like a 3,500 pound limit, and it didn't matter how tall or how short or what color clothes people wore. That was the maximum that elevator can handle. And so a TMDL is the maximum amount of pollutants that a water body can handle.
Right.
Got
Yeah.
it.
Thank you.
All right,
And
thank you.
for your leadership, certainly in that whole program. It was really indispensable. I guess my question is, what steps is Delaware taking to implement the goals and your requirements for your watershed implementation plans to meet the goals. And secondly, Pennsylvania has been fingered as a real culprit in not meeting those goals. Maryland's taking a very aggressive stance, going against the state of Pennsylvania, trying to get them, since they contribute a lot to the Bay. So do you envision Delaware, or is Delaware taking a very active role in challenging Pennsylvania's failures and trying to bring them into compliance? So those two parts of the question, and I do a lot of Chesapeake Bay work and follow it very closely. So I'd be very interested in your perspective and efforts.
Well, as you know, my name is on that TMDL. So
Sure is.
even though I wear the Delaware hat and I now approach the TMDL from that perspective, obviously, I have a lot of history and some ownership in seeing that be successful. Delaware, we're a very small part of the solution for the Chesapeake Bay, and so we're doing our part. We're implementing our WIP. A lot of challenges. Forest buffers, riparian buffers are one of the key things. They're not always easy to get people to install them. But yeah, I think we're on track to meeting our responsibility to it. As it relates to Pennsylvania, we are engaged with Maryland in conversations with the EPA and DC, and not sure where Virginia is right now, on how do we make sure that Pennsylvania lives up to their responsibilities. EPA came out today with an evaluation of Pennsylvania. I have not had a chance to read it yet, so I don't know what their conclusions are. I can tell you when I was at the EPA, we were trying to working both with EPA and with Department of Ag, U.S. Department of Ag, figuring out carrot in the stick there, so that Pennsylvania was in a better place to take ownership on that, if not, the backstopping from the federal government. So it's a key piece. The politics of that probably as well as anybody. And Maryland's way up here in the actual benefits to the Bay investment. Pennsylvania, though they have the largest load, like they don't have the same connection to, as I used to refer to it, the big blue part of the Bay. And so
right.
It's tricky, but we're getting close to 2025, and we knew that the easy stuff would be done early, and we're going to be left with the hard stuff. So
no doubt.
I think we're all trying to both support Pennsylvania, but also make sure that accountability is there.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Good to hear.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Sharon Kwiatkowski, you want to ask your question? You there, Sharon? Sharon.
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Here I am. Sorry. Wait a minute.
No problem.
I'm sorry. Yeah. My question changed a couple times. But in relation to what you were just talking about, where are we in relation to trying to have any control other states polluting our air that's been coming in? Is there anything we've been able to accomplish there? I know we're working on our water, but our cancer rates that are actually much involved with other states polluting our air is one thing. And the other question is, as Delawareans, what, in your opinion, would be the two main things that we truly could do as Delaware citizens to make this better, to truly help ourselves?
Okay, let me take a shot at the air one first, and it's a issue that Delaware has been raising for years, which is basically upwind states who are polluting our state and making sure that they are recognizing, particularly the EPA, that there needs to be more done. We filed a number of petitions, 126 through the OTC, 184C, I think, And basically it comes down to this thought in the Clean Air Act called Good Neighbor rule. And so recently the EPA has come out and they're actually currently taking comments on the Good Neighbor rule and what more needs to be done. We've had a Good Neighbor state implementation plan in place. A lot of other states haven't. So we're hoping through that process that the EPA will be able to get some of those other states, primarily for us, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio are the three big ones that are creating the impact. And so we're hopeful and we're preparing our comment letter right now to make sure that as they're looking for accountability, we also that they're doing it throughout the country as well. With regard to which I think was a fairly open-ended question on what more can we could do. We could probably be on this call for another 3 hours. I think the biggest thing is we need to minimize our pollution footprint, how we use products, how we transportation is one of the biggest impacts we have to air quality in Delaware. And so the framework is going to be set up. Zev was one of the things I didn't mention. I appreciate somebody else asking the question, but a lot of it's going to be consumer choice. And the car companies are doing their part because they're looking to change their fleets over in the cars that they sell, partly recognizing where the market is going. And so, every little bit is helpful. Minimizing trips, not over making food. We hosted Easter yesterday and I've got a refrigerator full of food. And so we'll probably be eating leftovers for the next several days so that we don't have waste. And, I think it's important for everyone to educate themselves from reputable sources on their scientific information. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we face is that there's a lot of information out there and people get it from different sources. And just because somebody puts it out a lot doesn't mean that it's accurate. And so I think we as individuals have a responsibility to make sure that we are getting good information, and then we're applying the information that we have to individual personal decisions that we make, and for those of us who have responsibility for making decisions on behalf of everyone, that we are utilizing that and communicating it.
Thank you. Cheryl Siskin had 2 questions, I think. Are you there, Cheryl? You want to unmute?
Hi, Secretary Garvin. Thank you for taking the time tonight. This has been very, very helpful. By the way, Dee, I can't wait to do the community compost in my community down in Rehoboth. And we also want to do community solar. But anyway, that aside, Sussex County seems to not really care about tree preservation. And they're allowing developers to run roughshod over habitats and vegetation. What is DNREC doing to try to put the brakes on some of that, especially until they adopt a buffer ordinance?
That is an incredibly great question. It is a issue that I've been concerned about for a while. I don't have an answer to the question. I mean, a lot of this is based on land use that we don't have authority for, but it is something that we need to figure out, just even statewide, how we can get back to minimizing the clear cutting practice that goes on, to then go back in and plant 3-foot trees to replace old growth trees. And as we talk about both climate and water quality, the Tree for Every Delawarean initiative will only have the impacts that we hope it will if we can figure out ways to minimize those taking trees down that aren't necessarily to take down. We recognize that when you do a development and you're putting in houses and sewer lines and roads, that there's going to be land disturbing activities. The question is, how do we minimize it?
And my second question was, what's DNREC's position on green amendments, similar to what they have in Pennsylvania?
I'm not in favor of green amendments. I think it's I don't think it's necessary. If there are issues that we have, and I've had conversations with others, if there are issues that we have with regards to any environmental legislation, we ought to address those head on. I think green amendments, and particularly some of the language that has been mentioned to me, opens up Pandora's box that I don't think is necessary.
Dustin Thompson had a question, I think, to Mike, maybe Dunmeyer. Dustin, you want to ask your question, I think, about level 3 chargers?
That was actually Mike's question I was responding to. I think the secretary had alluded to it in his slide deck, so I'll kick it back to Mike.
Yeah, so I saw you guys had the grant that the deadline was last week for the level 3 charging stations. I was wondering, since the NEVI program from the federal government has been announced, and they seem like they might be doing 80% federal cost share, I was wondering in the future, later in the year and next year, if you were considering doing a similar grant process that you currently did, or if you may be thinking about further subsidizing on top of the 80% pitched in from the feds.
We're looking at that right now to figure out, with the federal dollars coming in, where we want to take these programs. Obviously, historically, those type of programs, those rebates, those are kind of catalyst programs. Maybe just that little bit of extra dollars will change the calculus of somebody saying that, well, this is what I'm going to do. I think with the federal dollars that are coming in, we may be able to do a bigger footprint than, well, I know we'll be able to do a bigger footprint. We're just trying to figure out what is the best way to make that happen. We're still evaluating, because this is game-changing kind of dollars, that maybe we are in a position to do more than just catalyst dollars, which is, as I said, primarily what these programs have been set up to do. Is if I can get a rebate, is that enough for me to say, well, let me buy that vehicle as opposed to another vehicle? So it is going to be part of the conversation we have moving forward.
And have you guys discussed potentially doing another round for the level 2 chargers for, apartment complexes and, commercial spaces?
Yes, we've had those conversations and anticipate we will be doing something. I know.
Thank you.
I think June we have expiration of the program, so we're trying to put all those pieces together.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, while I'm talking to Dustin, you want to talk about the Earth Day events with the Sierra Club?
Yeah, sure. I'll just be super brief though. I put it in the chat. So Sierra Club has obviously a number of projects we're working on right now. One of them obviously is around climate change and a climate emergency that we're dealing with nationally, worldwide, and right here in Delaware, we're seeing some historic flooding happening even in communities that don't traditionally see this degree of flooding. Some of them see pretty recurrent flooding. It's getting more frequent. Anyway, preaching to the choir on the situation, but we're going to get together on Earth Day evening. You do have to provide proof of vaccination at the door for entry. That is the Sierra Club policy that we're doing in Delaware. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to hear from Anna Quizell, whose name I routinely mispronounce. So apologies, Anna, if you're on. is going to talk about the health impacts of dirty transit and contrast that with the health benefits of clean transportation. And she is going to focus on her one particular area of expertise as an example, which is electric school buses. So probably hear more about some of the conversations happening on the advocacy side of things. And she is working, I believe, with some folks in government as well. So happy to have anybody joining us. We are limiting the event to around 35 people, just so we have plenty of space to kind of spread out a little bit. And we're going to have several large air purifiers as well going. So take as many precautions as we can. Masks are encouraged for the guests. If y'all are comfortable, would love to see folks come out. Thanks, Jill, for the time.
For sure. Absolutely.
So Jill, I've got about 7 more minutes.
Okay. Thank you for the ones we've already had.
So
That is, got it. All right.
Maybe 1, maybe 2 more questions.
Okay. Does John Irwin, is it John Irwin have a question?
Yeah. So thanks. I'm sure you know that there are a bunch of us on this call who are interested in, the climate emergency. We talked a little bit earlier, I guess, that there's, some of the other states have come up with new legislation, and we know that, there's sort of talk this year that maybe Delaware can do something. And what we're really hoping for is that something can get to the legislature from DNREC about a new set of goals and declaring, sort of an agency directive to take into account the need for these goals to be met. So we're wondering, is there any kind of a timeline that you can give us about when maybe there could be a bill get out to the legislators? Because there's a lot of support among the legislators for acting on climate. People have heard the IPCC say it's now or never. And so we're just wondering, can you give us any guidance about getting something that could get acted on this year?
So yes, been having conversations with several members of the General Assembly. We've been looking at and evaluating the climate action plan and taking a look at things that we might need from a legislative standpoint. And so we're looking at something this year. I just don't have anything to share with folks yet.
Okay.
One more, Jill. Usually,
Okay.
as you heard me say at the Yes Conference, this is usually the
worst question.
Right. Exactly.
All righty.
What is that last one?
Dee, help me out. Who's the last question here?
I had my hand up to ask a question, but I don't know if we
you're
got through all the ones in the chat.
You're a co-host, so I think you had your
we get priority.
All right. Well, I'll try to make it quick. So we had a call recently with various folks, some from your department, about actually a larger issue called truth in labeling, which has to do with the the chasing arrows and the resin number, mostly about the arrows that are in plastics that really truly can't be recycled. So that was the beginning of a conversation on that issue. But in that meeting, someone mentioned that the plastic 6-pack rings on 6 packs of Coke or beer or whatever are illegal, and yet they're still being sold. And I was actually shocked because I don't buy beer or soda. I never even go down that aisle. I really honestly didn't think anyone was ever really still using those plastic 6-pack rings. And so we dug into it a little bit more. And I talked to Julie Moreau-Wenger, who runs the Retailers Association in Delaware. Long story short, apparently the way the Delaware Code is written now, it was implemented during the Universal Recycling, when the Universal Recycling Code was implemented in 2010. It allows plastic 6-pack rings if they are recyclable, biodegradable, or photodegradable. All 3 of which make no sense at all because, first of all, they're not recyclable, and biodegradable and photodegradable take hundreds of years probably. So anyway, I'm just wondering, would you be willing to work with us on trying to get the definition of plastic 6-pack rings changed? Because it makes no sense. And I frankly, whenever I mention it to anyone, everyone is just as shocked as I am that they're still basically allowed. So it just seems crazy. And I think there'd be a lot of public support to get that changed.
So let me look into it. When you started to ask the question, my response was similar to your initial, which was, do they even use those anymore?
They do. You'd be shocked.
I bought some the other day.
I don't buy soda, so I can't comment on that. The other beverage I may have bought once or twice, but they usually come in a.
When you
They usually come in cardboard, yeah,
Right.
but you'd be surprised.
Yeah.
Meat
So
was-
so let me look into that. The larger conversation on just kind of the truth in advertising type stuff. It's really difficult for us to try to drive markets on that kind of stuff coming from our state's purchasing power. And when I mean the state, I mean all of us, not the state government. But it is very confusing, and I think it's a good conversation with regards to the plastic rings that I'll loop back through with Tim and Jason and Adam and kind of see where we are on that. I made a note of it.
And I'll circle back to you too, Shawn, if you don't mind.
Okay.
The truth in labeling conversation is definitely a longer term conversation, but I thought this was kind of a discrete little piece of it that didn't make sense. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's much like the vehicle mileage and other things when you've got bigger states who are taking a leadership, they can drive markets, and so we look for opportunities to partner with them.
Maryland and New York are leading the way on the East Coast, so we'll follow them hopefully.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you ever
for
so
giving us
much.
this opportunity.
Appreciate your time, appreciate your openness, appreciate your honesty. And hopefully we can all work together and get it to happen.
I look
So
forward
thank
to it. Thanks.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
Thank you, Shawn.
Bye.
Secretary Garvin.